Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?
I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that it is I who sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God on this mountain.
If I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your ancestors has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them?
I am who I am. Thus you shall say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham and Sarah,
of Isaac and Rebekah,
and of Jacob, Leah and Rachel has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my title for all generations.
Go and assemble the elders of Israel, and say to them, the Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham and Sarah,
of Isaac and Rebekah,
and of Jacob, Leah, and Rachel,
appeared to me, saying, I have given heed to you and to what has been done to you in Egypt. I declare that I will bring you up out of the misery of Egypt, to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hittites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey.
They will listen to your voice, and you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Let us go on a 3 days journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. I know, however, that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all my wonders, that I may perform in it. After that, he will let you go.
I will bring this people into such favor with the Egyptians that, when you go, you will not go empty-handed. Each woman shall ask her neighbor, and any woman living in the neighbor's house, for jewelry of silver and gold, and clothing, and you shall put them on your sons and on your daughters, and so you shall plunder the Egyptians.
But suppose they do not believe me or listen to me, but say, the Lord did not appear to you.
What is that in your hand?
A staff.
Throw it on the ground.
So he threw the staff on the ground, and it became a snake, and Moses drew back from it.
Reach out your hand and seize it by the tail.
So he reached his hand out and grasped it, and it became a staff in his hand.
So that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their ancestors, the God of Abraham and Sarah,
of Isaac and Rebekah,
and of Jacob, Leah, and Rachel, has appeared to you.
put your hand inside your cloak.
Moses put his hand into his cloak, and when he took it out, his hand was leprous, as white as snow.
Put your hand back into your cloak.
So he put his hand back into his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored, like the rest of his body.
If they will not believe you or heed the first sign, they may believe the second sign. If they will not believe even these two signs or heed you, you shall take some water from the Nile and pour it on dry ground, and the water that you shall take from the Nile will become blood on the dry ground.
Oh, my Lord, I've never been eloquent, neither in the past nor even now that you have spoken to your servant. But I am slow of speech and slow of tongue.
Who gives speech to mortals? Who makes them mute or deaf, seeing or blind? It is not I, the Lord. Now go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you are to speak.
Oh, my Lord, please send someone else.
Then the anger of the Lord was kindled.
Moses, listen to me. What of your brother Aaron, the Levite? I know that he can speak fluently. Even now he is coming out to greet you, and when he sees you, his heart will be glad. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be your mouth, and with his mouth, and will teach you what you shall do. He indeed will speak for you to the people. He shall serve as a mouth for you, and you shall serve as God for him.
Take in your hand this staff, with which you shall perform the signs.
This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Can you remember a time when you faced a challenge and you doubted you were up to it? It might have been confronting a boss who was treating you and others unfairly. It might have been taking a foreign language class or organic chemistry, which is a foreign language to me. Did you ever have to break off a relationship which in your heart you did not want to end, but in your head you knew it was best? Perhaps you were faced with becoming a caregiver for a loved one who was dying, and you just didn't know if you had enough strength to do it. If you served in the military, you may have been given a mission that you thought you would not survive. God's call of Moses to return to Egypt to break the bondage of his fellow Hebrews was a startling intrusion into the life he had planned. Moses was tending his sheep, the sheep of his father-in-law, when he discerned God's voice threatening to shatter his calm existence. I have observed the misery of my people, so I will send you to Pharaoh to bring them out of Egypt. Some can point to one defining moment in their lives that forever altered the course of their existence. A personal crisis, an extraordinary opportunity, or revulsion against injustice spurred a person to take a new direction. They may have made a snap decision, or they may have wrestled with it, conjuring up all the reasons why they should not take up this challenge. That's precisely how Moses responded to God's call. The first excuse that spills out of his mouth is, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and lead the people out of Egypt?" It's the first in a string of excuses Moses offers up in hopes of dodging God's mission. And it doesn't take a Rhodes Scholar to figure out why Moses was not enthusiastic about God's plan. Most of us have confronted challenges that we doubted we could handle. That's the story of Moses. God called him to a bold mission fraught with risk. Moses was to liberate the Hebrew people from a tyrant who was determined to keep them in captivity. Remember that Moses had grown up in Egypt. He'd witnessed the brutality of the taskmasters. He'd seen the horrible injustice of slavery. He knew all too well that Pharaoh was a harsh dictator, intent on building all of these grand monuments to his glory. And he fulfilled his dream, not with willing laborers, but on the backs of slaves. When Moses discerned God's voice beckoning him to return to Egypt, it's no mystery why he began backing up and looking for the off-ramp. Moses was afraid. He feared confronting Pharaoh, and he feared failure. I suspect no one here can identify with Moses discerning God's voice coming from a burning bush, but who cannot relate to Moses in facing a stiff challenge and fearing, I'm not up to this task. I don't have what it takes to accomplish this feat. Most of us fall short of becoming the person God wants us to be because we're plagued by self-doubt. We tell ourselves, I've never done this before, and I don't think I can do it now. Self-doubt can halt us in our tracks and prevent us from accomplishing great things. Self-doubt can ensure us that we won't, because that voice keeps whispering, you can't. Shakespeare called our doubts our traitors because they rob us of the good we might have won by making us afraid to even attempt it. How many times over the course of our lives have we deflected God's call by saying, not me, I don't have what it takes? How does God respond to Moses' first excuse? God says, I will be with you. God assures Moses that we're never alone when we embark on difficult missions. God is with us. However, God's response does not seem all that reassuring to Moses. He was hoping for something more along the lines of, say, 1,000 battle-tested warriors backing him up. I suspect most of us can identify with Moses. It's fine to know that God is with us when we're embarking on something difficult, but we would like a little more tangible assurance that we will succeed. We want proof that the deck is stacked in our favor and that our mission cannot lose. God with us sometimes just doesn't sound like enough. Unconvinced that God's presence will assure success, Moses tries a different tactic. He says, if I go to the Israelites and I say, the God of your ancestors has sent me, and they ask, what is the God's name? What shall I tell them? And God replies with this enigmatic response that people have wrestled with for centuries. God says, I am who I am, or I will be who I will be. The Hebrew can be translated both ways. Richard Rohr says, God stays in dialogue, answering Moses respectfully and even intimately, offering a promise of a personal presence and an ever-sustaining glimpse of who God is, being itself, existence itself. A nameless God beyond all names, a formless God without any form, a liberator God who is utterly liberated. God asserts God's freedom from human attempts to capture God in concepts and words by saying, I am who I am, I will be who I will be. And of course, God's reply is hardly satisfying. We want to be able to nail down who God is. But of course, as soon as we do, we know we're not talking about the creator of all that is, the one who is always more than we can grasp. Moses is skeptical that if he says to the Hebrew people, well, I am sent me, that it will clinch the deal. He predicts how the people will reply. Suppose they don't believe me. Suppose they do not listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you. Not only does Moses balk at embracing God's summons because of his own self-doubts, but he also hesitates to take on God's call because of the doubts that other people have about him. I'm not asking for a show of hands here, but have you ever worried that others will find out you're not as smart as they think you are? Have you ever tried to cover up the fact that you're not as confident as some think you are? Have you ever tried to conceal the fact that you're not as brave as some think you are? Moses is reluctant to embrace God's mission because he's plagued by self-doubt. He's not the smartest, bravest, or most confident person. He's certain that there must be others who are eminently more qualified. He reminds God, I'm not even a good speaker. Others are far more gifted. He ends up pleading with God, Lord, please send someone else. Moses wants what most of us want when we face a stiff challenge. Guarantees. We want a guarantee that God is going to be with us each step of the way. We want a guarantee that that really is God's voice we discerned. We want a guarantee that we'll be able to dazzle the Pharaoh that we have to face. We want a guarantee that we're going to be able to speak confidently and convincingly. Moses is tormented by self-doubt, and he wants a guarantee that the Pharaoh will listen to him and that his mission will be a success. But God gives no guarantees. God says, Aaron, your brother, will be with you, and I will be with you too, and that's sufficient. It was no different for all of the prophets that came after Moses. It was no different for the disciples of Jesus. It was no different for the Apostle Paul. No guarantees that their missions will be successful. In fact, Paul was executed after he was imprisoned and firing off these letters to congregations where all the members are constantly squabbling with each other. No doubt he imagined that he had completely failed. And yet, he succeeded beyond his wildest imagination. The most difficult thing you ever do is the most rewarding. It's an incredible boost to your faith to conquer a mountain that you feared was too steep. God believed in Moses more than Moses believed in himself. And it is the same with us. You have more gifts than you can imagine. You have more influence than you can imagine. You have more courage than you can imagine. You have more power than you can imagine. When you work in harmony with God, it creates a divine human synergy. And that can accomplish more than you can imagine. You cannot consider what you've done in the past and simply project that forward and imagine that's all you'll be able to do in the future. There are times when God beckons you to sacrifice the safety of your current routine and risk breaking new ground. Rather than self-absorbed security, God challenges Moses to risk everything for the benefit of others. Moses is to put his life on the line, not only because justice demands that captives be liberated, but because in giving ourselves for others, we become our truest selves, our richest selves, our fullest selves. Every mother who makes a sacrifice for a child knows this truth. God gives you the freedom to respond as you choose. Moses could have walked away from the burning bush and settled for just grazing sheep. But in the end, despite his doubts, he embraced God's call, and it led to an incredible adventure. Do you have the courage to live your faith? God beckons you to head out on a journey and to remain faithful come what may. Because God wants to use each one of us to bring light to the dark places in our world. Vincent van Gogh said that if you hear a voice within you that says you cannot paint, then by all means paint and silence that voice. When God summons you, if you hear a voice that says you cannot succeed, silence it and say, "Here I am, Lord. Let's go."